I'm risking it all to tell the ugly truth. It's time. So we'll see. We'll see what it is about.
And at that point,
This is from a couple of days ago.
It got a lot of attention, especially after Epstein's.
Imagine bringing your side project to life.
Commercial.
Just by thinking about it. Meet Base 44.
Death in prison.
I'm going to just start it over. So let's jump into this Whitney Webb, Epstein news. I don't know what she's going to say, but she's deep. She's a deep diver.
And at that point, it got a lot of attention, especially after Epstein's death in prison. And around that time, as I understand it, Ryan Dawson's YouTube channel was deleted. So he was unhappy about the lack of exposure. My series on Epstein, which included aspects of the Epstein-Israel relationship.
If something feels off lately, you're not imagining it. Here's how someone with real depth sees it.
And he admitted to some people that tried to intercede between us that I had not plagiarized anything of his at all or taken any of his research, that he was just mad that his YouTube channel had been deleted, which is understandable, but obviously I had nothing to do with that. So, eventually I challenged him on it publicly, and he doubled down, and he's been doubling down since, and has never been even able to say what facts or topics even within the Epstein scandal I supposedly took from him, nor has he provided any evidence to that in the better part of, I don't know, I guess like 6 years or so now.
Dang.
And it's an attack on my integrity that's really unfounded. And basically, through back and forths with him and intermediaries, it comes down to basically him saying that he wrote about Epstein before me, and even if I didn't take his research, I should credit him as having written about it before me. But after all the attacks on my character and my work, and the fact that I never used his research, I'm not really, I haven't really been interested in promoting him just based on my personal experience with him. But I have acknowledged that he has covered it before me, but so have a lot of other people like Derek Brose and Nick Bryant, who I have collaborated with in the past and who I consider colleagues, and who find my work original and valuable and don't think that this is true. And I absolutely reject it, and 100%. If you read my books, only the second book is really about Epstein. The rest is a ton of research on things that preceded Epstein significantly that, to the best of my knowledge, Ryan has never talked about. And even in discussing Epstein, I'd cite all my sources. My book has thousands and thousands of footnotes. And Daryl Cooper, who made this claim, admitted on Twitter that he has never read my book. So how could he accuse me of cribbing someone's research in a book, accuse my book of being built on someone else's research when he's never even read my book? I mean, it's very unfair. Cooper, apologized and claimed that he had third parties reach out to apologize, though I was not contacted by those third parties, at least from what, the means of communication with me through my site. I didn't get anything, but it stinks, because how many people saw that claim on, Tucker Carlson, which is one of the biggest podcasts in the country, versus how many people saw Cooper say that he regretted saying it, that it was impulsive, and that he's never read my book. So, it's unfortunate, to say the very least. I've tried to reach out to Ryan over the years, because I think it's really unfair, and I think it's really unfounded. And if you're going to accuse someone of something serious like that, at least put up evidence for your claim, not just I wrote about the scandal first, when lots of other people did too. And, I cover a lot of topics that Ryan has never talked about, and I've done the same quality of deep dive research on those topics.
Pretty good.
Whether it's palin.
Other than language manipulation, that's my specialty in talking about language manipulation and false mental states. She doesn't talk about that stuff, but that's not her niche, right? She's more involved in 3D matters.
Tier or Moderna, all sorts of other series and investigative reports that I've done over the years. So it should be very clear to people that I absolutely have the ability,
right,
to do the type of research that you can find in my books and on the Epstein scandal, without needing to steal from someone else. And the fact that I can cite my sources and they're not Ryan's sources, I think makes it pretty clear. And also, Ryan's never written a book. He doesn't write, to the best of my knowledge. He's a live streamer, and has made these image, like these maps, I guess, of connections. And a lot of my work on Epstein includes figures that are not in his so-called maps. And also, Ryan has gone around claiming that he has the Epstein client list, which is inaccurate. And he, claims it's from the victim testimony and all this stuff. But it's very different than what I would say are the web of Epstein associates that I talk about. And to the best of my knowledge, the people that believe this claim either don't like me for some other reason or are big fans of Ryan's and have never engaged with my work at all because of what Ryan has said. And it's frankly defamatory and slanderous. And I would really appreciate that he stopped doing it when it's completely unfounded. And after like 6 years, he can't even say what thing within this very broad scandal. It's a very broad research topic that I supposedly took. And, I'm still doing original reporting on aspects of the case that he's never talked about. But I think, if I don't need to be conspiratorial here, but one of the reasons I think this is being so pushed into the public now after sort of, being discredited and simmering under the radar over past years is because Ryan has kind of made it a point to absolve Trump in some of this stuff going on right now, whereas I do not. I'm a lot more critical of Trump than Ryan tends to be. And so, as the Trump administration has struggled to manage the narrative around this stuff, I wonder if that might be a reason. But again, I don't really know. I don't really know why Cooper chose to do that. He claims to be a longtime fan of Ryan's, which is fine. And I've never engaged with Ryan's research or even watched his stuff because of this antagonism. And it's frankly an attack on my integrity and my work. But I would encourage people to go look at his stuff and decide for yourself and look at my sources and my Epstein reporting and see if you find any validity to that. And, a lot of people that have done that have not believed this claim. So I'll just leave it there.
Yeah. So you think that Daryl said what he said is because he's a fan of Ryan's? Is he a friend of Ryan's? Do you know?
That's my understanding that he has followed Ryan for a long time and is clearly, as he said,
So this is this has to do with some personal beef, bro. I thought you were gonna sit here and tell me some interest. Okay, I don't know. We're gonna see what's up, but this is some personal beef of who came out with what information. Who cares, bro? As long as we figure out who did what and they go to jail or something worse.
Himself unfamiliar with my work.
Okay. Yeah, I think one of your strongest one of the strongest points you're making here is that if anybody reads any of your work about anything, you very clearly have the ability to do very deep research and write about it and put it all together. And there's no question about that. That's why you're one of my absolute favorites, is because you really get in there and do a phenomenal amount of research and put a web together that is you're just, I think, smarter than all of us. and so well, to me, it's so easy to see that you clearly are doing your own stuff. You don't need to steal from anybody.
I just don't understand the accusation on that level because again, like you said, I've just made it so apparent through my work over the course of several years now that I always cite my sources.
Yeah.
And the only people that believe this are people that don't follow my work. That's pretty much, it should speak for itself.
I'll tell you.
But, unfortunately, a lot of accusations when they're made on social media or they're made in passing, people don't necessarily ask for the proof. You know?
Right.
And then those kinds of things can propagate online or people can say them and, it's just, it stinks. I would much prefer to collaborate. I tend to view journalism as a team sport. I think it's important for people to work together to get to the truth.
That's an interesting way of looking at journalism. You shouldn't look at journalism as a sport because journalism is necessary to distribute truth that must be for everyone. And journalism right now is wholly corrupted to not do that.
What's actually going on with big scandals and meta cartel networks like the Epstein scandal. And, I've also been made aware that Ryan has accused multiple other people of plagiarism on different topics without evidence. Like, it's not just me. And I think I don't think that's
To be honest, I don't even know who Ryan is. This is the first time I've ever heard of Ryan. I thought this was going to be more about Epstein, but this is more about a beef between journalists.
helpful. And obviously, in my case, as I said before, I find it very defamatory.
Have you had any sort of ramifications from it?
Well, I think the biggest one is, I guess, just this claim being made on Tucker Carlson. But I mean, people have left reviews of my book on Amazon claiming the work is not mine without evidence, which obviously is untrue and sucks. And if you read the books, again, I mean, I talk about a lot of things that Ryan's never covered. And the entirety of volume 1, my book is a 2-volume book, isn't really even about Epstein. It's about the group that Epstein was a part of and the instances of sexual blackmail that precede that and how organized crime and intelligence came together. And ultimately, it's an attempt to discredit my work, which I guess might be in vogue right now because I don't absolve one of the 2 political parties. I make it very clear that this is a bipartisan issue. And so,
Correct.
I think Ryan has been discrediting my work as a way to sort of promote himself. I don't think he's necessarily been doing it for other reasons, but I think, there might be people who would like to take advantage of that to try and push a more partisan line as it relates to the Epstein scandal right now, which is obviously of political benefit.
So see, this is why I needed to watch it, because see, look, this guy Ryan is trying to make it seem like it's not both sides, it's only one side. And Whitney Webb is like, no, it's definitely both sides.
The moment. So like in the case of, when this initially came out, this accusation was initially made. It was claimed that I couldn't have figured out what the mega group was. It's on my own. And this is a group that was co-founded by Leslie Wexner and Charles Bronfman in 1991. Sort of this group of billionaires who, as I note in my book, are all linked to, a lot of the known members were linked to organized crime, if not currently, then historically. But initially, if you look at my early Epstein series for Mint Press News, I focused a lot on the Bronfman family going back to the 20s and 30s. And I was curious, at the time when I was writing that series, if there would be overlap between Bronfman and Leslie Wexner. So I Googled Bronfman and Wexner, and one of the first results is the Wall Street Journal article on the mega group. So, eventually, if you start looking at these networks, you're going to be seeing if there's connections between various people and various names. And it's obviously you're going to overlap with people to some extent. And so I cited my source there, but the source certainly wasn't Ryan. And so again, I think this is kind of an ego-fueled thing, and it's unfortunate that Ryan hasn't gotten the exposure he feels his deserves, but that's not my fault, and I shouldn't be taking the heat for that, frankly.
Well,
after 6+ years, when I've made it very clear that I'm very capable of doing research on a litany of topics. Yes. So I will also say that this initially probably goes back before Epstein, because I'm sure Ryan will bring this up in some sort of response. I wrote a piece for Mint Press News in early 2019, I believe, about the dancing Israeli scandal around September 11th, 2001. And I had never heard of Ryan until I wrote that article, and he claimed I took his research that time also. But the source documents that I had cited as it relates to the dancing Israelis were all available on archive.org, which I linked in the piece. Right. And then because Ryan made a big stink about this, I actually went back into the article and added an update where I mentioned his name and added his opinion about this. And I actually made a mistake in that article. And Ryan doesn't make the mistake apparently in his research, because I had a deadline, so I didn't get to read this police report. And so I made a mistake about dating of the photos and the time that's on the photos of these Israeli citizens that seem to have foreknowledge of 9/11. And if I had used Ryan's research, I wouldn't have made that mistake. And I went out of my way to cite him. So, I mean, it just kind of stinks. And then those pictures were obtained through a FOIA request that Ryan did not make. It was another person who gave them to me to publish. I was the first to publish them, but I later found out that person gave them to me because he hated Ryan, and I wasn't aware of their beef until until all of that happened. But I mean, a lot of this is unnecessary drama, and I would really just like it to stop so we can get back to
Yeah.
research and, exposing the elites that are engaged in these crimes. I think concentrating power in that few hands, especially in hands that have, capital so concentrated up there as well, is increasingly problematic. There's obviously the adage that, absolute power absolutely corrupts, and I think that that history does tend to sort of show that. And I think, people, particularly in the United States, don't want a small handful of the richest people in the world controlling and micromanaging their lives. I personally am of the view that there are oligarchs that are interested in king-making markets. I think that's particularly true of someone like David Sachs, who's going to be the crypto AI czar and doesn't have to divest from any of his, investments or other, potential conflicts of interest with some of the firms that he'll be involved in overseeing or deciding regulation on. And when you have that type of power, you can easily king make and pick and choose companies
bro.
that you want to see win. And so you kind of have to wonder if this is really going to be a free market type of situation, as a lot of people would like it to be, because when you have that type of centralized power sort of deciding who wins and who doesn't, and having only OpenAI and Oracle, for example, in this recent announcement, those are very big companies. They're likely to only get bigger should there be a more decentralized landscape in these industries that are so important to foster competition. Or are we getting close to a quasi monopoly model in certain fields of big tech? And I think that could be potentially problematic and something to look at, especially when you consider that there have been statements made by members of the quote unquote PayPal mafia that free market competition is for losers, and that companies should find a niche and corner that market and essentially build a monopoly or quasi monopoly. And some of those people have done that in direct collaboration with the national security state, as is the case of Palantir, for example, which was created with CIA and In-Q-Tel's direct involvement, and has very significant CIA connections from its origins to now. So if you're building a quasi-monopoly and you don't like free market competition, and you're going to partner, with the most powerful and unaccountable parts of the state in that way, what does that ultimately mean? And is this going to be the free market utopia that we're being sold, or is something else going to happen?
What was your initial reaction to the announcement of the $500 billion that are being invested into American AI infrastructure?
So unfortunately, I wasn't able to pay super close attention to the press conference that involved, of course, Sam Altman and Larry Ellison and Mayoshi Son of SoftBank. But essentially, it's not really surprising to me that there's being a big push into AI infrastructure. And this is something that's really been what I would argue a bipartisan push that's been going on for some time, starting with really the National Security Commission on Artificial Intelligence that was led by Eric Schmidt, the former Google CEO, who, even though he's a Democratic donor, has been very active in this space and sort of has the same view propagated by more Republican-leaning big tech figures that
Get paid to get smart.
Commercial.
Join the eToro Learn and Earn Challenge. Take our Academy courses.
the U.S. needs to outcompete China in AI specifically. And some of the National Security Commission on AI comments and presentations they gave that have since been released through Freedom of Information Act requests essentially suggests that the roadmap to doing so is to impose lots of domestic surveillance and AI-powered surveillance technology on the American public as a way to sort of leapfrog China, because they argue that China has already done that and thus has a much larger user base and data set for all of these different AI technologies. And so in order to outdo them, we must drastically increase our user base of these AI technologies, which includes things they say like, surveillance, as I mentioned earlier, facial recognition, expanding that, expanding e-commerce, reducing in-person shopping, and really, other in-person activities, including healthcare, in-person doctor visits, moving to telemedicine as much as possible. And this was really a big focus of that commission, which was the meeting of the national security state and the big tech industry in the years prior to COVID-19. And a lot of that push into the digital realm was a consequence of a lot of COVID-19 era policies that's helped sort of feed that ambition. But I think with this goal to have an increased investment in AI infrastructure, we're likely to see that develop. And it's not really surprising that you have Larry Ellison of Oracle involved. He's recently had comments about the need for things like digital ID in the United States, which would be sort of a core foundational aspect of this type of wide-reaching AI system, and also said that, basically, I'm paraphrasing here, of course, but invasive AI surveillance systems on citizens will help them be on their best behavior,
Yeah, insane.
which is a rather Orwellian thing
Completely.
to say, and sort of very much feeds into the idea of the panopticon, where if someone is always being watched, the panopticon, is used in the context of surveillance a lot, but it was originally a model for a prison where prisoners are always being, or under the impression they're always being watched, but they can't directly see the people watching them.
Right.
And that this sort of induces obedience to be on their best behavior at all times. And I, personally view that as kind of a very big and not necessarily positive trade-off between liberty and at least perceived security. And I think people would do well to sort of interrogate some of the consequences of handing such a big AI infrastructure project to companies that are run by individuals with those views in particular.
There's two things I want to drill into. I've heard you say panopticon before, but I actually don't know what that means. What does that mean?
So as far as I'm aware, it was originally a design for a prison, as I mentioned a second ago. I believe it originated in Britain, and basically the idea was to sort of have a somewhat circular prison with the cells on the border, and there's a long, sort of obelisk-esque tower in the middle, where the guards are, and the windows are either tinted or constructed in such a way that the prisoners can't see the guards watching them, but the impression is created that they are always under watch, so as to induce obedience, because
That's wild.
they could be being looked at all the time, but they don't really know.
Okay,
so as
so
far
Hey, that's kind of what you're in right now.
as I'm aware,
Panopticon
that's
is
the
a
origin of the term.
okay. It's a stand-in for eternal surveillance.
Yeah, but as I said, originally it was a prison thing, but since then it's sort of been adapted to sort of refer to the same idea when applied to mass surveillance in the digital era. Because obviously, when this was developed, I forget if it was like the 18th or 19th century. Obviously, digital technology as it exists today wasn't around back then. But I think the idea persists and can arguably be scaled to really to levels that the
See, I think she's talking about stuff that's already happened, bro. She's talking like it's going to be happening.
original designers of the panopticon concept probably couldn't even fathom back at the time.
Okay, so then just breaking it down, pan all over, optic, presumably sight. So omniscient sight, basically, or omnipotent sight. Okay, cool. Totally understand. Now, I have a feeling that as we talk today, that underlying the conversation that we're about to have is this idea of liberty versus security and the trade-off there. If you were going to plant a flag in your own life and give us a breakdown of how you see that trade-off, is it 100% liberty and I don't care what that means for security, or is it some kind of balance?
Well, it's hard. I would rather start with a paraphrase of a rather well-known quote of Benjamin Franklin's, which goes something along the lines of, those who trade their liberty for security, ultimately have neither of those things. And I think ultimately, what my views on that would be in an ideal world are different from what my views are on it as it relates to the world we live in today. And I think there's a pretty clear indication, particularly over the past 20 plus years, the post 9/11 era, that great surveillance powers, at least in the hands of the United States and most other governments in the world, frankly, are routinely abused for the purpose of silencing dissent, and among other things that are not positive for liberty. And that you could argue that there are situations where insecurity is engineered in the public in order to facilitate people giving up their liberty or civil liberties in particular for what they perceive as an increased security, or they're told as increased security. And I don't really think that's necessarily always the case at the end of the day.
Right.
And I think a lot of the mass surveillance system, as it was designed in the immediate post 9/11 era, was meant to rely a lot on sort of predictive paradigms. So what do I mean by that? Essentially things like what are now called predictive policing or predictive health. Sort of the idea of
Predictive programming.
policing, I think, is a rather polite way to say pre-crime. The idea that we can stop criminal activity or a terrorist attack before it happens by looking at certain data flows, for example. And the same was also posited in the post 9/11 era for stopping bioterror attacks before they happen and natural pandemics before they happen, which is also kind of a sticky issue as well, because some of those proposals and their sort of resurrections in the post COVID era, I think are a little
My bad.
dubious in a sense, because
Ugh.
they sort of posit creating interventions, health interventions, before symptoms even show up in a particular population based on certain markers identified in AI and in sewage water, for example, and things like that. So you're really putting a lot of trust in algorithms, and sometimes those algorithms are not as accurate as the company claims. And as far as I know, a lot of those claims are not independently vetted. So ultimately, it could lead to some unfortunate consequences, I think, particularly if you're trying to prove in a pre-crime scenario that you weren't going to commit the crime. It's you versus the algorithm, and who do you think the position of authority is likely to side with in those scenarios. I think it's kind of creates sticky situations.
All right, that feels like a comment around the reality of this stuff. You said that there's a discrepancy between how you'd feel about it in an ideal world versus the world we actually live in. So the concerns around, would this be, one, can it be trusted? Is certainly a big question. Two, are there liberty constraints that would become so problematic as to the cure being worse than the disease? So those are the things that it sounds like you run into when you look at the reality of this stuff being deployed. Talk to me though about the ideal world. Is this stuff that you wish that we could deploy, but you just know in the hands of humans we can't trust it? Or even in an ideal world, your take would be very different?
Well, I think in an ideal world, this type of stuff to tackle crime and illness wouldn't really be necessary, quite frankly. But I guess it depends on what your definition of the ideal world is. And I guess sort of in the scenario, is the government trustworthy? I guess in that scenario, if it were provably
No,
trustworthy,
government is
and we didn't have
trustworthy.
all these national security scandals of grave severity in many cases going back decades and decades and decades, and no accountability for national security overreach over that time period as well, it would be easier perhaps to trust. But I don't know. Personally, I'm like a kind of a voluntarist. Like I just kind of prefer that people. I don't like to make decisions for other people necessarily. And I
Right,
tend
me
to
neither.
sort of be a liberty maximalist. I think that sort of, begets better outcomes in general. I don't know. Again, it depends on what you sort of define as this ideal world. And since a lot of my focus, as a writer and researcher, has sort of been on the national security state, I tend to think it's not appropriate to give them certainly not more power than they already have. And I think there needs to be accountability for what the overreaches that we know have happened in investigations and the ones we probably don't know about. But I really don't foresee there really being any transparency or change there, even with the incoming administration.
Okay, so would the following assessment, obviously oversimplified, but just so I know if I'm on the right track with the way that you view the world, is your take on the way the government works is they will spy on their citizens to gain control over their citizens. Period.
Yes.
I think that is a accurate representation of your base assumption. Is that true?
I think it's close. I would also add that ultimately you have sort of, I sort of see the government as a public-private partnership. The public sector, because of political donations, among other things, is always very in tune to the concerns of the private sector. And a lot of the most powerful players in the private sector and in the financial sector are very interested in sort of de-risking the world as much as possible. And a lot of intelligence agencies sort of share that view. And so I think a lot of this surveillance and these predictive paradigms and all of that, a lot of it sort of comes down from their perspective, I think, to sort of de-risking the society and markets as well.
Okay, de-risking things doesn't sound immediately negative. Why is de-risking bad? Or why does it yield bad outcomes?
So, if you want to, take risk to zero that there will be crime in a particular area, the type of interventions you would have to impose would be pretty significant, right? It doesn't sound bad when you phrase it that way necessarily. And that's why I was phrasing it that way, because I think that's how these people in elite circles tend to think about it, ultimately, at the end of the day.
Dang, bro. What did I just watch, actually, bro? What did I just watch, actually, bro? Yeah, think about this, right, people? The system of mental control is losing all ability to control anything. And that's why it needs you to get hooked on AI as soon as possible. And the real race is not China versus the United States for AI. The real race is to get AI so involved so quickly that they can take over control completely of your brain by putting a chip in your head. And you don't want to do that. That's partly the main reason for the race. And trust me when I say a lot of people are going to do that. A lot of people are going to think they're going to get smarter by putting a chip in their head. And oh, will it seem like they're smarter? But yet, oh, wait till something happens, or you have to go here, you have to do this, you have to do that when you do it. And guess what? You won't even think to not like doing it because the chip won't let you. So even if you were actually against those things that you're now doing, you wouldn't know because the chip would make sure not to let you know that you don't. You know what I mean? You already know. You know, most people don't know that they don't know already. Now imagine having a chip implanted in their head when they're stuck in a situation where they don't even know they don't know, and put the chip in. That effectively creates the ability for no chance of waking up from the not knowing you don't know situation, because the chip will keep you in the not knowing you don't know till forever. So that's wild. That's a wild video. Go give it a... I've never heard of this guy before. Business Score is pretty cool. Give it a like. I'll go ahead and subscribe to it. Go ahead and give me a like. And that's all I'm going to say about that.